the one thing I've learned from Donald Trump, having been around him and with him now for 8 or 9 years, is that he is a master negotiator. He's one of the greatest negotiators I've ever seen. And I think in the end of the day, he's going to negotiate a better deal with China and with the Europeans and with the Brits and with Canada and Mexico.
Now we're continuing to look at the impact of that 25% universal car import tariff. We're lucky enough to have with us Stephen Moore, Donald Trump's former economic advisor during his election campaign and author of The Trump Economic Miracle. Stephen, I think it probably would be a miracle if all the economists turned out to be wrong and tariffs actually worked to make everyone richer, don't you?
Well, great to be with you. And, I'm not a big tariff guy, but I think Trump is trying to level the playing field here. I think he is a master negotiator, whether you love him or hate him. And I think in the end of the day, he's probably prevail here. I think he's going to force a lot of these other countries to bring their tariffs down, which would be a good thing for everyone. But you're right. It's causing a lot of economic and financial pain right now in the U.S. and around the world.
So the US imported about 8 million cars last year. Last night would be going some. Are US companies producing enough to fill this gap, do you think?
They could, sure. But, we do import a lot of cars, and Americans like European cars, and they like Japanese cars, so we buy a lot of them. But we have a pretty robust auto production. By the way, most of your listeners and viewers think that it's probably all in Detroit because that was sort of the original hub of the car production in the world. But now a lot of those car plants are like, the southern states of the United States. So we'll see how this all works out. But look, my feeling about what's happened with the financial markets is this is an overreaction. And I'm not a guy who's into tariffs, but the trade element of our economy in the U.S. is only about 15% of our economy, and the tariffs are maybe a 10% additive. So I'm surprised. I'm a little surprised that the financial markets have had this kind of hissy fit when I think it's going to be resolved in the next month or so, maybe sooner. And I think it's just not that big of a deal in terms of the whole world economy.
Well, it certainly seemed like a big deal to us at the moment, I must admit. But look, we're lucky enough to have somebody who's been in the room.
Well, look, why is that? Because, the UK is not a major producer of cars.
Well, certainly not now. No, but seriously, you have been in the room with Donald Trump. We're lucky enough to have someone who's been in the room with Donald Trump. So what I'm hoping you'll do is kind of take our listeners into the room with you a little bit and give us an idea when you've had a conversation with him about an economic principle like this, like tariffs, which you must have done. Give us an idea of the to and fro about that. A little bit about how he argues and how he thinks about this. How explicit is the deal part of this? To what extent is it ideological? So give us, if you wouldn't mind, a little feeling that we're there too with you.
Well, that's an excellent question, and you framed it well. Is it deal making or is it ideology? And I think it's a little bit of both, frankly. Look, Donald Trump means what he says, and he says what he means. He does believe that the rest of the world treats us unfairly. He gave a talk yesterday to the media where he said, we're being, quote, ripped off. Now, I don't necessarily agree with him on that, but it is a truism that we do in the United States have virtually the lowest tariffs in the world. And he believes when other countries are imposing tariffs on our goods that we're being, quote, ripped off. And I think there are a lot of Americans who agree with them. Trump, you mentioned, is he just dealing here? I always tell people, if you want to understand the way Trump's mind works, is you have to read the book. And you know what book I'm talking about. It's called The Art of the Deal, written, 30 years ago. But Trump is the one thing I've learned from Donald Trump, having been around him and with him now for 8 or 9 years, is that he is a master negotiator. He's one of the greatest negotiators I've ever seen. And I think in the end of the day, he's going to negotiate a better deal with China and with the Europeans and with the Brits and with Canada and Mexico. But you're right. It's causing a lot of, as he acknowledges, it's causing a lot of short-term pain.
Yeah, so it's interesting because I think I was less impressed when I did read Art of the Deal than you clearly are, because the problem with this is it kind of works once. You can set a situation where a country like Britain has to kind of retreat and give in to what the US is demanding of it, and it works while the relationship of power is as it is. But what he's basically doing is kind of borrowing against the credit of decades of special relationship, and eventually he'll have spent that margin, and Britain will make a decision, actually the trading relationship and the political relationship isn't as solid as we thought. So maybe we need to find ourselves different allies and different relationships. Isn't this quite short-term thinking?
Well, I see your point, but I think you're missing something fundamental, which is Trump is right that Britain and other countries are charging us higher tariffs than we charge them. So I would throw that question right back in their face and say, how is he being unreasonable to say, hey, China, you've got to reduce your tariffs. They're twice as high as ours are. Hey, Japan, lower your tariffs. Or Canada, they're charging 50 to 100% tariffs on our dairy and agriculture products. We depend on our farm economy. So in other words, what I'm saying to you is what he's asking of Britain and what he's asking of China and what he's asking of Canada is absolutely, he's not asking anything unreasonable. He's just saying, look, we have low tariffs. You should have low tariffs too. And if you're not going to lower your tariffs, we're going to hit you.
Well, how would you respond? The Canadian elections are on, and there's inevitably going to be a bit of a kind of a political battle between the parties as to how to respond as firmly as possible, because no country's leaders wants to look as though they're being pushed around. So would you say to us, Keir Starmer ought to go, think about what concessions to Donald Trump, think about what concessions he should make? And the problem with that, obviously, is where does that stop? Then what Donald Trump will think, well, they're a bunch of suckers, because that's the way he does think sometimes. I'll do it again. Maybe the best thing we can do is retaliate rather than give in.
Well, there's a lot there in that question. I'll answer the last part first. I think the worst type of response is retaliation, because that is a tit for tat game that no other country can win with the United States, because frankly, every country and look, this is just an economic reality that Trump is enforcing, which is every country in the world has to trade with the United States. We are the hub of the world economy. And for example, China, if you want China's economy to go into Great Depression, just shut off their access to the American market, their economy will implode. So Trump is using that leverage to get other countries to be more cooperative. And look, the whole theme of Donald Trump's runs for president was put America first. And that's exactly what he's trying to do here. Now, with respect to Canada, I think, I wish he would tone it down a little bit with Canada, because you're quite right. He's, the Canadians are nationalistic, and there's nothing wrong with that. And Trump is kind of poking at them, partly because he doesn't like Trudeau. Some of this is almost just personal. But one of the things we want to make sure doesn't happen is that because of Trump poking at Canada like he is and saying we're going to make them the 51st state, is that it's actually playing into the hands of some of his enemies in Canada. And we may end up with a more leftist government, which we don't want to see. We want to see, look, we have a very special relationship, obviously, with the UK, but we have an even more special relationship with Canada. They are right on our border. And I go back to when Ronald Reagan was president, came up with the idea of a North America free trade zone, which, and by the way, Trump was the one who signed the updated version of that. So I guess what I want to say to your listeners, though, is I think at the end of the day, this is going to work out. I think the financial markets are overreacting to what's happening here. And I bet you a dime to a dollar that, 6 months from now, when this gets resolved, the economy and the financial markets will react in a very
Well, I'll be sure
way.
to let the financial markets know. But we're very, very pleased to have you on. Thank you so much, Stephen Moore, for your contribution. That's Donald Trump's former advisor. Stephen Moore, author of the book on Donald Trump's economic miracle, and I think giving us a very clear description of Donald Trump's economic policy there. So thank you to him.